Well, will we be surprised about the albums we cover this week? I think Matt was surprised by the pronunciation of the first band we covered this week on several occasions. Yeah. But how's that for a transition? Go ahead.
Good job,
Perfect.
John.
Yep, we've got AUTECHRE, Amber, and in the opening montage you heard Slip, and now you're going to hear Foil. Okay, Matt, where are the stats?
All right, so AUTECHRE's Amber comes in at number 659 in the 1990s on Best Ever Albums, number 82 in 1994, number 3,850 of all time. It's actually AUTECHRE's fourth highest rated album on Best Ever Album, behind Chiastic Slide from 1997, Confield from 2001, and Try Repeat from 1995. So plenty of other better AUTECHRE albums according to Best Ever Albums. And AUTECHRE's ranked number 520 of overall artist rankings on Best Ever Albums.
Okay. This album came out November 7th, 1994. It is an English electronic music duo, Rob Brown and Sean Booth from Manchester, UK, and they formed in 1987. They have actually said that they don't care how their band name is spelled as long as you say the AU part right. You can say however you want. So however we pronounce it is good, fine by them.
That's an interesting classification for a name right there. Okay.
Yeah. They have 15 studio albums, and this is their second. Genres are electronic. We've got a new subgenre, IDM, intelligent dance music, which they do not like. For the record,
intelligent dance music.
Yep.
Good for them for rejecting that title.
That's
That
pretty
sounds
pretentious,
that sounds
huh?
like literate pop, like rock music. You know that you'll see. Yeah. So good for them for saying fuck that.
Also classified as ambient, techno, and experimental influences. These are self-identified electro and hip hop of the 80s were big foundations for them. Acid house as well. They've cited music concrete composers. We haven't name checked that term in a while. Todd Dockstader and Edgar Varese are music concrete composers. And the English experimental group Coil. We didn't talk about them either. I would also say they are influenced by Kraftwerk, Brian Eno, and Throbbing Gristle. If I had to throw out some other ones. Similar to Aphex Twin, Boards of Canada, and Bjork. Those are the only bands that I recognized on the list of all music. So there's a million others if you want to check them out that you may be familiar with. Their album Sign reached number 31 on the top album sales on Billboard in 2020. I guess that's a new chart. No surprise they did not make the Billboard Hot 100 or 200 when this album came out. Some fun facts, all of their full-length albums have been released on the UK electronic label Warp Records. This album is the first to be composed of entirely new material. Their first album was essentially a compilation of older material. The album cover is a panoramic view of the sandstone cliffs in Cappadocia, Turkey. And I thought this was funny. They put out an EP called Anti-EP, which was explicitly a protest against the Criminal Justice and Public Order Act of 1994, which prohibited raves in the UK. And it said on a sticker of the rapper, quote, Flutter, which is the third track, has been programmed in such a way that no bars contain identical beats and can therefore be played at both 45 and 33 revolutions under the proposed new law. However, we advise DJs to have a lawyer and musicologist present at all times to confirm the non-repetitive nature of the music in the event of police harassment.
In fairness, intelligent dance music, they are not doing a good job there of not trying to lean into that term a little bit. So.
So that's really all I have. There was not a lot on this album or band. They are still active and continue to put out albums after this. I think this is the only time we're covering them. I am curious as to what you guys think of this album. And let's start with Matt.
Yeah, so no prior knowledge of AUTECHRE prior to this week. This is a long record. It's almost 75 minutes long. So they're using all of that time on that CD. So this is I kind of look, it's hard to talk about this because it's such a genre that I don't really go to or know a whole lot about. It's not surprising that there's a ton of other artists on that list that you were talking about, Josh, and you're just like, I don't know any of these, right? And I'm sure
Right.
I wouldn't either.
But we have listened to other electronic music
We have.
and
We have.
experimental
And
stuff.
I'm just acknowledging the fact that I am aware that this is a very broad and also popular music genre that I am very ill versed in, right? So I kind of look at this. It's hard for me to look at this as like individual songs. This is kind of like an overall piece to me. This is kind of this is like a so because it's not like anything.
I'm with you,
one
Matt.
song,
I'm the same way.
It's not like any one song stands out above as being this is the clear. Like I have no idea, Josh. If I were to pick the songs for this, throwing a dart at the wall and
right.
pick that one, right? So at random and that's not necessarily a bad thing because I think that there is merit in each one of these songs. I think that there's different parts that I found myself liking, or picking up on certain things. But at the same time, this is also kind of the very definition of a right time, right place album. This is not an album you listen to at any part during the day. This is a nighttime album, particularly late at night. And I never got to listen to this late at night because I'm not up late at night anymore. I just, I tried to like last night, I purposely sat down, I need to listen to this album at night, and it started at 8 o'clock or whatever.
You were correct, Matt.
So because I did have this on earlier in the week, and it was like during the day, and I'm like, I'm not going to be able to have any cogent, takes on this because it all just bled together. It was I wouldn't say it was boring, but it was forgettable. It didn't really, nothing stood out. So when I actually listened to it at night with my headphones, I will say that is another critical component of really getting into this music is doing so on headphones.
There's some stuff going on in the background, like
Correct.
on a low level that I
you can
noticed.
pick out more. You can pick out more things in the background, and you can certainly pick out more of the left right, because they're playing with that as well. What's going on in the left and right. So that part of the auditory experience is certainly enhanced if you have headphones on. And I could only guess. I'm sure that if you had a gummy beforehand too, that would probably be a way that's going to bring some of this out, because with music like this, to me, it's something that you kind of have to set the mood, you have to set the time right to be able to really delve into what they are doing. And again, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I'm just acknowledging this was a hard album to A, listen to, and B, get into this week, and given the time constraints that we have. Having said all that, when I did listen to this last night with my headphones on at night, I enjoy this. There's something very there's a meditative quality about this, that kind of hypnotic, with the beats that are happening, the cool little effects that they do. Like in the first track, I think it's Foiled. They kind of have this, I think it's called flanging, where you kind of have this effect go and you kind of bring it down and you turn it. You're almost turning down the sound waves or whatever, so it goes from a higher pitch to a lower pitch. It's the same kind of noise, but it's just gradually getting lower, and then they bring it back up again. So they kind of do these things where they flirt around a little bit with the effects, which kind of it's not a typical thing that really draws you into because usually other songs, it's either the beat or it's the melody, maybe the lyrics. There's other things that you're really gravitating towards, and these are more sound effects. This is more of like something that would be, you might be more prone to hear something like this on a film score, or in a movie, or a scene on a TV show, or maybe a video game, perhaps. That's kind of what you're going to be exposed to this more, rather than just hearing it certainly on the radio, but just at somebody's house, right? But I think as a whole, it's enjoyable, and that's kind of the condition that I would recommend listening to it into. I just don't really find myself in those conditions very often, and so it's going to be a harder thing for me to get into. But it did remind me of certain other bands. There's a band called I had a buddy from high school that's kind of into similar stuff like this, and he was into this German duo called Kruder and Dorfmeister. That's very similar to this, and I remember listening to them at night, hanging out with him, and it was like it's a much better environment, right, to be doing that. So I think there's certainly a time and place for this. I'm glad that this exists too, because there's certain bands like Radiohead, one of my favorites. I'm sure took a lot of tips from this, because they incorporated a lot of electronic stylings into their music, and they made it more westernized, right? They put more of the verses and the choruses to it, the beats that made it a little bit more listener friendly, I would say, or made it easier to get into. So, and I know that guys like this, certainly Aphex Twin, are influential for a lot of other artists that I do enjoy. So again, I like that this is out there. I might pick this up every now and then, put something like this on in certain circumstances, but it's not very often. Maybe like once or twice a year, I could think of putting this on. So it gets a little bit of a knock for that, because it's certainly not an everyday type of music. It's a specific place. But if you're in that moment, if you're up for it, then this is probably going to be. It's a really interesting ride that it takes you on. So so it's kind of hard for me. So I guess in that context, if I'm doing all of those things, this is a thumbs up. It was an enjoyable listen in that regard.
Yeah, I have some of the same takes that you do, Matt, but a little bit deviation in some ways. One of the things that was a goal of mine on the podcast was certain genres. I wanted to get more of an understanding of the context so that I had a frame of reference to be able to evaluate. So a little bit like you said, Matt, it's hard sometimes when I don't have what I feel to be a fully fleshed out context. I'm still differentiating between all of the different subgenres in electronica, which I think has the most subgenres of any field along the way. So, we haven't even gotten into major genres yet, like trance or EDM or trap or stuff like that. This falls more, though, into what I'm learning is like the ambient lane of things. And in that sense, the context that I have from doing the show so far in terms of what I think I can pull off of is some of the krautrock stuff, the Feist and the Kraftwerk and the Neu. There's some similarities there. Some of the found music, certainly of Brian Eno, right, would be stuff I also feel, because this is a very ambient album to me. We have covered a couple singles, like we did The Orb, right? Remember a little bit earlier, a single and stuff. And so like I'm beginning to get the basics. The first Bjork album we covered, I don't think prepared me as much for this. I saw elements of it, but it didn't seem like a natural fit. Now later, things that would come is that subgenre there is now of the video game music is definitely something that I hear bits and pieces of in this, because one of the fascinating things to me about this album is that you only can listen to this style of music in one of two ways, and they are polar opposite. One is with complete attention in your headphones, and the other is like in the complete background in a space, around you. You know what I mean? And that's such different listening experiences for me. Through pure accidental timing this week, I was able to listen to this album around 11 to 11:30 p.m. in the space element where it was just on, but I wasn't necessarily locked in. And the second time I listened to it was on a plane at about 6:30 at night. So cans on, you know what I mean? Like fully in, next to two people in the middle of them that I was never going to talk to. So full on listen. Right, yeah. On a completely side note, I heard about this new trend there is in
raw dogging.
Raw dogging. Yes, did you hear about this? Where like you apparently take long not the raw dogging you're thinking of, Matt. Not your daddy, or in this case me and your raw dogging. No, this is something where you go on a flight, Matt, and you just stare ahead with nothing, no music, no anything, no food, and just see how long you can mentally. Anyway, I was not raw dogging while listening to this album. I definitely had cans on and was engaged. Yes, but
I love that Josh had that right at the hip.
Mm-hmm. I've seen like articles on it and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, I just saw an article about it this week, so I just thought I'd bring that. For those that don't know, feel free. Well, I was gonna say Google raw dogging, but you may not want to at work because you might get a whole nother subgenre of stuff. But anyway, I was listening to this, and it works in both formats. It's got like a little bit of a hypnotic feel in both cases. When you have the headphones on, the hypnotism is it's like meditative. You sort of lean into it. You're present. You notice those little deviations in the back that Josh was mentioning, and it's an active listening experience. Then, though, when you listen to it in a space, it almost is like something that focuses you a little bit. I don't know what it is. It almost is sort of like white noise in some ways, that you process the differences, but Matt, it's sort of like what you said. It just becomes one piece of music for me when I listen to it in that format. So I think in the open format, it becomes a broad canvas, whereas in the specific listen, I definitely, it's, 10 to 12 different, what is it 11 songs, this album? Yeah, 11 different pieces, and the differentiations are clearer. I think I also saw this music described as algorithmically programmed, which makes sense because it does sort of, there's a science to this music. I feel there's a calculated nature to it. Like we used to talk about math rock, right? Like there is a little bit of like math electronica in this where it's like, let me like fuck around with songs and pitches and sounds. And some of that appeals to me. And it's like, ooh, that's an interesting found noise or an interesting feeling that evokes. But sometimes when it runs to like 75 minutes, that's when it's sort of like, I just think this album would have been much better at the 40 to 45 minute mark. And I know I say that a lot about albums, but I particularly feel it about this one because after a while, the experiment went a little too long, and I was sort of like, I wish it was just a little bit more of a contained experiment. And I almost wish that they took this and broke it into like 2 different albums. So because I'd be more likely to engage in the catalog at the 45-minute mark than I would if I knew every album was 75 minutes. But I did enjoy it. It's mood music. This music fully affects me, like in my psyche, kind of, and I almost process it like therapeutically. I'd say more so than fully emotionally. It's kind of I'm curious to see like what it evokes in me, whether it be thoughts or feelings. Sometimes it's nothing, and sometimes it's like, ooh, that oddly catches my attention cognitively or emotionally. So that's something I'm finding I do like about the more ambient music that we're covering, especially the more we do it. But I don't feel I've also fully explored it enough to kind of know exactly what it is technically about the music that evokes that. I do like, though, when it moves from space into more of that metronomic sound that's a similar sound. I like that transition where it's like sparse sounds drawn out and then into something that's almost like serves the function of a drum beat. I have found that combination of sounds is appealing to me as a sort of the ambient into sort of the syncopated is an appeal for me, and they do that several times on this album. Standout tracks for me were the 2 that I picked for the playlist, which was Montreal and Slip. I found those to be my 2 favorite songs. I did like the front end of the album a little bit better than the back end of the album. I can't tell if that was because by the end I sort of was like, I'd like it to tie up a little bit, or if it was just the tracks themselves were better. I feel like I would need more listens to truly distinguish. So yeah, I would say that that I certainly didn't. I enjoyed this. I wouldn't necessarily say it goes to the top of my list, and I do feel like I need to listen to it more often. And I am viewing this album as much about introducing me to the genre, and that in about 5 years, when we've done a lot more of this music, I feel like I'd have a much more literate take than I do right now. So for those who may be listening to this, check back a little later in the 90s, because I feel like it'll be a touch point for me in terms of my understanding of electronic music.
Yeah, I had a lot more difficulty with this album this week. I totally get and hear what you guys are saying about it being, a night album. I agree with that, and the ambient part I also agree with. However, I this album evoked a lot of like not calming emotions in me. I felt pretty agitated listening to it, and it felt slightly kind of like menacing and disturbing to me the like more I listened to it. The first time I listened to it through, it was much more like ambient. Even though I was listening on headphones, I was not like fully paying attention to it, and I don't think it really kind of moved me one way or another. But then when I was paying attention to it the second time through, like that's when I like started kind of feeling agitated and like unsettled a bit. So I feel like this is not, I don't want that in ambient music. I don't want to feel, I guess what I'm trying to say is like,
well, that's why I described it as therapeutic, Josh, because I got some of that at times too. You know what I mean? I'm like, I'm surprised I'm having this type of reaction to this.
Yeah. I guess I want ambient music to be more like comforting and warm. And I feel like this is a very cold type of sound to it. And I feel like the vibe was very different than what I want ambient music to be, even though I guess technically it fits that definition. I did hear some of the things we talked about, Matt, about them playing with the way sounds in the music. There's some fading in and out too that I noticed throughout, especially in that first track. It's very sparse in a way that was hard, and I think I like electronic music that ultimately kind of has like a pulsing beat to it. I think that's obviously, we've said that before about me with tempo and other types of music as well, but this is very like electronic, like too much like strumming power lines, or that sound that power lines make, like that like throbbing humming sound that they can have. And Montreal kind of has like, as if you like dropped a coin on a desk over and over again. So it's like very like metallic sounding from what I got listening to it. And then like the second time through, it just became like too much for me. Like by the time I got to Piezo, which is maybe like the midpoint of the second, around the midpoint, I just like couldn't handle it anymore. So maybe to your point, John, I was just like not in the headspace to listen to it. But and I don't really even like, it's not like I'm actively like dissatisfied with this album or annoyed by it. It's just I wasn't like I wasn't enjoying it, but I also like wasn't enjoying it as like an intellectual exercise either. So I can't really recommend it. It's just a very like specific type of electronic music. This album is a very specific type of electronic music or ambient music that I'm like not really vibing with, or interested in. Even something like Aphex Twin I found like much more like appealing than this. And I really didn't get any of like the electro or hip hop influence. This album just feels like so like far out on the edges in terms of what you were doing. And I don't like view it like, at least from the Bjork we've heard either, that's like much more like appealing to me than this was. So again, we've talked about challenging electronic or experimental music before. I haven't really responded too well to that as well, but this was just, I guess I appreciate on some level that it evoked a strong emotion in me like that, and intellectually it was fun talking about, but I don't really see myself coming back to it. Even like it's also like the KLF album that we listened to, that was even that had kind of like, stuff going on with the radio dial and kind of the overall idea of like there being like a road trip type of thing. Even I like had more to grab onto than this. So can't really recommend this, but I think between the three of us, I think I think we gave a good enough description of what it's like that you might be interested in it.
Here's a question that I have though. Like, if you do an album like this, and it's just interesting you brought up the KLF, because I remember reading, because I did the research for that, and they did, I don't know if it was that album or a different album, that they basically they kind of just improvised. They just set up a bunch of stuff and they just did like 45 minutes of this like electronic ambient music, and they just improvised. And I just wonder, like, generally speaking, when you go to put an album out like this, like how much of this is pre-written versus improvised? Like like you start off with a beat. Like, how do you write stuff like this? Because it's
did you read about AUTECHRE? Like their history? Because after we were done, I didn't want to be biased, but I was just like, give me a little bit of the idea of what's going on. And like these guys they were friends in London who just exchanged tapes back and forth of them like distorting just different songs back and forth. And I'm like, when you know that that's sort of something that these two people found, they did, right? And they found two other people to do it. I mean, obviously you've got an experimental brain and a partnership, right? Like normal, and I'm not even saying this in a negative way, but like normal kids are not just like, it would be cool if I took pop songs and stuff and just inverted them with tape loops and stuff like that. It's just sort of, you either are one of those people or you're not. And I can't imagine people with that mindset going, let's go into the album, the studio and make a very traditional album right now. It seems like it would be sort of the polar opposite of what you'd be looking for.
Yeah, but I'm just curious as to like, okay, we're going to do an album. Like, let's just start like messing around with the instruments I don't know. It's just, I find it interesting. And as you go along, if you start it, like, are they improvising this? Was this stuff that they kind of practiced for a while and then made into this and kind of wrote the songs? I don't know. It's just kind of, I'd be interested in getting a little bit of a backseat into like how you make this sausage, I guess,
Yeah. I'm sure computers are involved in some way. In terms
oh,
of
for sure.
constructing it all.
Yes.
But yeah.